He said I was his whole life. Watched me shatter without a blink. But then, I made sure he'd never smile again. First person, emotional, cold revenge style storytelling. He said I was his whole life. Watched me shatter without a blink. But then, I made sure he'd never smile again. I didn't fall for him instantly. No, he was patient, calculated. He knew how to find the cracks in someone's soul and whisper his way in like smoke curling under a locked door. I was vulnerable when he found me. My world was already halfway collapsed, grieving the loss of my mother, estranged from my father, freshly out of an abusive relationship that had left bruises I couldn't show. I was a girl bleeding quietly on the inside, pretending to smile for the world. And that's when he appeared. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't sweep me off my feet with grand gestures. No, he did something far more dangerous. He saw me, or at least, he acted like he did. His words were warm, safe. He told me I wasn't broken, just buried. That he wanted to help me dig out from the wreckage. He called me his phoenix. Said I'd rise from the ashes, and he'd be there to catch me when I did. God, how I wanted to believe him. He listened when I told him things I'd never said aloud, about the nights I sat curled up in the bathtub, hoping the silence would swallow me whole. About how my ex used to tear me down piece by piece, not with fists, but with words sharp enough to scar. He never flinched. Just held me tighter and whispered, "You're safe now. I've got you." I thought I'd found the kind of love that heals. He met my friends, charmed them effortlessly. He made late-night playlists just for me. He left sticky notes on my mirror that said things like, "Smile for me today, sunshine." It was soft, gentle, the kind of love that made you think the storm had finally passed. And slowly, I let go. I let him in. All the way in. I gave him the parts of me no one else had ever touched, the scared little girl hiding inside the grown woman. I handed him my trust like a sacred thing, believing he'd guard it like treasure. But treasure is only valuable to someone who sees its worth. He didn't. At first, it was subtle. Missed calls, canceled plans, texts that felt colder, shorter. I told myself he was just busy, tired, that life was hard, that I shouldn't cling too tightly. But the silence started stretching longer. His eyes, once full of warmth, turned distant, like he was staring through me instead of at me. I started noticing the lies, the vague excuses, the way he'd suddenly become unreachable on weekends. And the worst part? When I confronted him, he didn't even try to lie well. He just shrugged, as if all those promises he made, the ones that had kept me breathing through my darkest nights, were nothing more than empty poetry. He told me I was too intense, that I needed too much, that he wasn't my therapist. And then he said it. Maybe I never loved you. Maybe I just liked the idea of being needed. Like a switch had flipped, the man who once held me like I was breakable now looked at me like I was disposable. Like I was just another sob story he could walk away from once it got too heavy. That's when something inside me snapped. The tears didn't come. Not that night. I sat in silence while he left, not even bothering to shut the door behind him. He didn't think I was worth a goodbye. But I wasn't crying. I was planning. Because if I was just a chapter in his story, he was about to become a scar in mine. The kind that never fades. And I promised myself, if he liked watching me fall, then he'd love what came next. The first thing I did after he walked out was stare at myself in the mirror for a long, long time. Not to cry. Not to grieve. That part of me, the one who wept for men who left, had died the moment he looked me in the eye and told me maybe he never loved me. No. I stared to remember. To really see the woman he thought was weak. The woman he thought he could break and discard like she was nothing more than a failed project. I wasn't shattered anymore. I was sharpened. In the days that followed, I went quiet. He probably thought I'd be blowing up his phone, begging for answers, showing up at his door like some broken mess. But I didn't. And that's what rattled him first, the silence. That silence was my first weapon. I knew him well. He needed to be wanted. He fed on the feeling of being irreplaceable. So when I went ghost, no calls, no text, no online presence, it scratched at his ego like sandpaper on raw skin. I knew eventually he'd poke around. And I was right. 3 days later, he liked an old photo of us on Instagram. A subtle signal. A test to see if I was still watching, still craving a breadcrumb. But I didn't respond. Not even a view on his story. I wasn't craving him anymore. I was preparing for him. You see, while he was out there assuming I was spiraling, I was collecting evidence, patterns, dates, lies, and secrets. So many secrets he'd buried under charm and soft smiles. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He underestimated my memory. He didn't know I'd been paying attention all along. I remembered the names he'd casually mentioned, coworkers, friends, one-night stand jokes. I now realized weren't jokes at all. I began mapping them like constellations. The girl he swore was just a friend, I found her profile. The bars he said he was working late near, I pulled credit card receipts from our shared food delivery account. He used the same email to order wine at a hotel 2 blocks from where he said he was working that night. Sloppy. It didn't take long to piece it together. I was never the only one. Maybe I wasn't even the main one. He loved the chase. The story. The savior complex. He liked rescuing broken women just enough to feel like a god, then walking away once they started healing without him. But this time, he picked the wrong woman to leave standing in the ashes. I didn't want revenge that looked like rage. No, rage was easy. Expected. I wanted a revenge so slow, so quiet, that by the time he realized the fire was at his feet, the flames were already licking his throat. And I knew just how to begin. He had a weakness. His reputation. To the world, he was charming. Empathetic. He volunteered at local charities, taught workshops on emotional intelligence, and ran a podcast about healing from toxic relationships. The irony would be laughable if it weren't so disgusting. I still had access to a scheduling app. He never changed the password. Cocky mistake number 2. That's where I saw it. A speaking event at a women's trauma recovery group. Set for next Friday. He was going to stand in front of broken women and preach about healing. The same man who watched me crumble without a flicker of empathy. No, not this time. I created a new email. A clean identity. One he couldn't trace back to me. And I began crafting a story. Not fiction, the truth. With screenshots, dates, receipts. I compiled everything into a neat little folder titled, When the Healer is the Hurt. I sent it anonymously to the event organizer, along with a simple note. Before you hand him a microphone, you should know who you're giving it to. And then I waited. Not to see if he got canceled, but to watch the first domino fall. Because this wasn't the end. This was just my opening move. The fallout started slowly, just like I hoped it would. The speaking event? Canceled. Not publicly, of course. These kinds of things never are. But I saw the announcement on their website. Due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts, this week's guest speaker will no longer be appearing. No mention of his name. No drama. Just a quiet withdrawal, the kind that only meant one thing. Someone had gotten nervous. And I knew him. He would be seething behind that perfect smile. He didn't care about the women he was supposed to help. He cared about the applause. The validation. The praise that fed the hollow thing inside his chest. Without it, he wasn't anything. Just another man with a god complex and a mess of secrets he thought he'd buried. But now they were starting to rise. He texted me that night. Hope you're okay. Been thinking about you. It made me laugh. Actually laugh. The audacity. The subtle manipulation. The sick attempt to see if I'd bite. To test if I was still under his thumb. I didn't reply. I just watched. And while he scrambled to figure out who had started pulling at the threads of his perfect little image, I kept weaving. I wasn't finished, not even close. See, the thing about men like him is they don't expect their victims to rise. They expect silence. Shame. They expect us to disappear, to carry our pain like a scar we hide under long sleeves and fake smiles. But I wasn't hiding anymore. And I wasn't alone. In the shadows of his past, there were others, women he'd done this to. I found them in comments, anonymous forums, a quiet trail of pain that all led back to him. Most had never spoken. They thought no one would believe them. They thought he was too charming, too kind, too well respected. But all it takes is one voice to crack the glass. And then the others start to speak. I became that voice. I created a platform. A space for survivors to share their stories anonymously. A place where his name wasn't sacred, where the truth could finally echo loud enough to drown out his lies. I didn't use my name. I didn't need to. All I needed was their pain, raw and real, to fill the space he once used to play God. And slowly, they came. Stories. Screenshots. Messages that matched the ones I used to receive. Promises that mirrored mine. Patterns so precise it felt like reading chapters of my own heartbreak, written in different hands. He had a script, a system. But now his past was catching up to him, in the form of dozens of anonymous voices he couldn't silence. And then, the first real blow landed. An influencer he'd once dated, someone with a sizable following, reposted one of the anonymous stories from the platform and added just 4 words. I believe every word. Her post went viral in hours. People started asking questions. Some defended him, of course. There are always those who worship the mask and ignore the monster behind it. But the cracks had started to show, and once the mask slips, it never sits quite the same again. He went quiet online, deleted comments, turned off replies, posted a vague story about navigating a hard time. But I knew better. He wasn't navigating. He was drowning. And I wasn't offering a lifeline. Because this wasn't revenge fueled by rage anymore. No, this was cold. Calculated. The same way he was with me. I was just reflecting him back to himself. He took my story. My trust. My healing. Now I was taking his legacy. And I wasn't done yet. Next. I was going to remind his newest girl exactly who she was sleeping next to. The first time I saw her, I felt a strange, hollow ache. Not because I was jealous. Not because I missed him. But because I recognized her eyes. They were the same eyes I had when I was with him, wide with hope, heavy with silence. She looked like someone trying desperately to be enough. Her smile was soft, but strained. Her laugh didn't reach her eyes. And when he touched her lower back at that bookstore, I noticed how she flinched just slightly, the way I used to, like even affection came with conditions now. She had no idea what kind of storm she was standing in. I followed them from a distance, not to stalk, but to witness. I needed to see if he was still using the same tricks. And he was. Same compliments. Same gentle hand on the small of the back. Same tone of voice when he said, "You make everything feel lighter." It made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream at her. To grab her by the shoulders and tell her to run, to show her everything he'd done. But I knew better now. You can't save someone who doesn't know they're drowning. You have to let them find the water themselves. But I could hand her a lifeline. So I did. I created a fake profile. Not to catfish her, not to manipulate her, just to get her attention. I followed her quietly. Liked a few of her art posts. She was a painter. Soft, moody colors. Always women with blurred faces. I knew what that meant. I used to draw that way too. Eventually, she followed back. I waited a few days. Then I sent her a message. Simple. Respectful. You don't know me. But I think we've loved the same man. And I think he's still lying to you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure. She didn't reply. For 3 days, nothing. Then came her message. Is this about him? And with that, the door opened. We didn't meet in person. Not yet. We talked through voice notes. She was hesitant, defensive at first. But I didn't blame her. I remembered how deep I'd buried my own doubts when I was in love with him. How I defended him even when he left me hollow. But little by little, her cracks began to show. He says I'm too sensitive. He disappears for hours, but always has a good reason. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one trying. He said you were crazy. There it was. I almost smiled. He always said that, called the women before me crazy, unstable, too much. It's how he got away with it. If he discredited us before the truth came out, no one would believe our side of the story. But this time, it wasn't working. Because now, I wasn't alone. And neither was she. She asked for proof. I gave it to her. Screenshots. Photos. The post from the trauma center. The timeline of lies that overlapped hers perfectly. I didn't tell her what to do with it. I just gave her the mirror. And she looked. A week later, she was gone. Deleted every photo of him. Blocked him on every app. Posted a story of a painting she'd done. A woman with her face intact, eyes sharp and bright. The caption simply read, "Healing starts with truth." She never said his name. She didn't have to. But he knew. Because that same night, he called me. Blocked number. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. The 4th time, I answered. Not because I wanted to hear his voice, but because I wanted him to hear mine. You always said I was your whole life, I said softly. Funny how quickly you tried to replace me. He didn't speak. So I continued. I hope you know, this is just the beginning. You build your kingdom on broken women. And now, we're the ones tearing it down, brick by brick. He finally spoke. Just one word. Why? And I laughed. Cold, sharp, honest. Because you watched me shatter without blinking. Now I want you to watch everything you built burn. I hung up. And this time, I knew. He felt it. Not the loss of me, but the loss of control. And I was just getting started. He always thought he'd be untouchable. Maybe that's why he never covered his tracks. Why he kept the same passwords. Why he left his ego wide open like a wound he thought no one could cut. He thought I would break quietly. Disappear. Become another soft-spoken casualty in his legacy of lessons. But instead, I became the storm. And the storm was only getting louder. A month after that final call, his world was unraveling in ways even I couldn't have predicted. I didn't even have to push anymore, gravity was doing the work. That's the thing about narcissists. When the facade cracks, their empire doesn't collapse with a bang. It crumbles like glass under pressure, slow, painful, loud. He lost the podcast sponsorship first. Apparently, one of the other women, a brave, beautiful soul from my anonymous forum, had reached out to the brand with a compilation of her own receipts. DMs. Voice messages. A voicemail where he screamed at her for not answering during his time. She never posted it publicly. She just handed it to the right people. Quiet. Direct. Final. The brand dropped him in less than 48 hours. His voice, the one he used to preach healing and emotional growth, was silenced in an instant. And it shook him. How do I know? Because 3 nights later, I got another message. Not from him, from his mother. Yes, his mother. She said she didn't want to get involved. That she was sorry, I was hurting. But that I should stop whatever I was doing, because it was ruining his life. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. He ruined lives. I'm just returning the favor. She blocked me. Good. Because the more people who tried to guilt me, the more I knew I was getting under his skin. He could gaslight his girlfriends, his followers, maybe even himself. But not me. Not anymore. I had fire in my lungs and proof in my hands. I didn't need revenge through violence or threats. I didn't want to hurt him physically. I wanted to destroy the one thing he held above all else, the illusion of perfection. So I sent one last package. Not to him. To his employer. He'd recently picked up a consulting job at a mental wellness startup. Ironic, right? His profile was still on their website. Certified in trauma recovery coaching. I nearly choked when I read it. So I printed every screenshot, every voice note, every testimony, redacted names, blurred faces, but all real. I packaged it neatly, professionally, like an HR report. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. He ruined lives. I'm just returning the favor. She blocked me. Good. Because the more people who tried to guilt me, the more I knew I was getting under his skin. He could gaslight his girlfriends, his followers, maybe even himself. But not me. Not anymore. I had fire in my lungs and proof in my hands. I didn't need revenge through violence or threats. I didn't want to hurt him physically. I wanted to destroy the one thing he held above all else, the illusion of perfection. So I sent one last package. Not to him. To his employer. He'd recently picked up a consulting job at a mental wellness startup. Ironic, right? His profile was still on their website. Certified in trauma recovery coaching. I nearly choked when I read it. So I printed every screenshot, every voice note, every testimony, redacted names, blurred faces, but all real. I packaged it neatly, professionally, like an HR report. I sent it directly to the founder. And I signed it with one sentence. If you care about real healing, you won't let this man speak for it. I didn't hear back. I didn't need to. Because a week later, his profile vanished. Just gone. No press release. No public statement. Just erased. And it was poetic. Because that's what he did to all of us, wasn't it? Erased us. Made us feel small. Disposable. Unseen. Now it was his turn to vanish into the shadows he used to throw us into. And me? I was lighter. Not healed. Not yet. But freer than I'd ever been. I had stopped dreaming about him. I stopped checking his socials. I no longer wondered, what if? The chains he wrapped around me with sweet words and empty promises, they'd rusted and fallen off. But I wasn't done. Not until the world knew what he really was. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about warning the next girl before she ever fell for his smile. And I had one final move to make. I had taken away his stage, his audience, his voice. But there was one last thing left, the thing he loved even more than his image. Control. See, he was never addicted to love. He was addicted to domination, to the power he held over soft hearts and broken minds. The way he could bend someone into believing that his presence was a gift, that his silence was their fault, that their pain was too heavy for anyone but him to carry, even though he was the one who caused it. He needed control to breathe. So I was going to suffocate him with freedom, mine, and the freedom of every woman who still lived in his shadow. The platform I had built, the anonymous space where stories poured in like rain, was now a growing wildfire. I rebranded it, created a visual campaign called Unmask Him. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about them, the men like him, the manipulators, the emotional predators who wore kindness like a second skin. And I made a choice. I put my name on it. For the first time, I stepped out of the shadows and told my story publicly. My real name. My real face. I wrote it like a letter. He said I was his whole life. He watched me fall apart. And when I broke, he stepped over the pieces and called me too much. But I am not too much. I was too powerful for a man who only knew how to dim light. And now, I shine alone. It went viral. But not because I asked it to. Because it spoke to 1,000 women who had never found the words. The campaign took off. Influencers shared it. Therapists reposted it. Survivors messaged me with tears and gratitude. My inbox flooded with voices that had been trembling in silence for years. I read every single one. I responded to as many as I could. And somewhere in that wave of pain, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for him anymore. I wasn't even doing it for me. I was doing it for us. For the girls who cried in bathrooms while their boyfriends texted other women. For the women who apologized for bleeding after being cut. For every soul that gave everything, only to be told they were never enough. We were enough. He wasn't. And slowly, I watched his silence stretch. He didn't respond to my public story. Of course not. What could he say? That's not true. The screenshots. The witnesses. The patterns. It was all there. He couldn't fight it without exposing himself further. So he did what cowards always do when the truth becomes louder than their lies. He vanished. No more social media. No more podcast. No new relationships posted. Just silence. Except this time, it wasn't mine. It was his. The man who used to flood timelines with wisdom quotes and healing tips now hid in the same shadows he once used to control others. And that, to me, was justice. Not rage. Not revenge. But silence. The kind of silence that doesn't scream, it echoes. I didn't need to hurt him physically. I hurt him where it counted. In his ego. In the part of him that only existed when someone else was smaller. And I made sure no one else would ever shrink to fit him again. That was the real power. Not breaking him with fire, but burying him in truth. It started quietly. A whisper behind the curtain of his silence. Someone spotted him at a local bar, alone. Not charming. Not surrounded by admirers or girls hanging onto his every word. Just there. Watching. Shrinking. They said he looked over his shoulder every few minutes, flinching at laughter that wasn't his. He was paranoid. Good. I wasn't chasing him anymore, but he thought I was. And that fear? That unease? It was the very thing he'd made me live with for years. I remembered it well, how I used to walk on eggshells, unsure which version of him I'd get each day. Now, the roles had reversed. Now, he was the one watching every move. Because the women he once silenced had found their voice. And I wasn't the only one telling the truth anymore. One of his exes, someone I'd never even met, posted her story in a viral video. Another woman came forward during a live panel on emotional abuse. And then another. Each voice, louder than the last. Each story, terrifyingly familiar. Same patterns. Same words. Same wounds. The web he thought he'd woven in secret was unraveling thread by thread in the public eye. And it wasn't drama. It wasn't vengeful exes. It was proof. Real. Measured. Documented. And he couldn't erase it. He couldn't block us all. That was the part he'd never understood. When you hurt one woman and call her crazy, the world shrugs. But when a dozen women say the same thing, people start to listen. He tried to crawl back online. I saw the attempt, a vague post about forgiveness and cancel culture. But it didn't land. Because there were receipts now. There were women with timelines, screenshots, and a unified voice that even his most loyal followers couldn't ignore. His comments were filled with a new kind of noise. Not praise, but accountability. And he was drowning in it. For a man who lived off of control, losing the narrative was death. He couldn't shape the story anymore. He couldn't gaslight a collective movement. And I think that's when it finally broke him, not when he lost his sponsors, not when his mother begged on his behalf, but when he realized the women he hurt now had each other. We were no longer isolated islands. We were a storm. And storms don't ask for permission to destroy what never should have been built. I got one final message from a mutual acquaintance. Someone who used to worship him, one of his former podcast interns. She wrote, "I believed him. I thought he was brilliant, but I watched what you and the others shared, and I realized I never really saw him. Thank you for speaking. That message didn't feel like validation. It felt like closure. Not because someone finally agreed with me, but because it proved what I always suspected. He never fooled me because I was weak. He fooled me because I loved deeply. And now, that love had turned into something indestructible. Not hate, but clarity. The kind that doesn't tremble when it walks away. The kind that builds legacies, not from broken hearts, but from risen women. It's strange how healing doesn't come with a parade. It doesn't arrive wrapped in gold or sing a song to announce itself. It tiptoes in quietly, the moment you realize his name doesn't tighten your chest anymore. The first time you hear his voice in a memory and don't flinch. The day you laugh and don't feel guilty for feeling joy again. That's what real closure looks like. And I had it. He didn't. The last I heard, he moved cities, deleted every account, changed his number, tried to start fresh in a place where no one knew who he really was. But the internet doesn't forget. And the truth? It always echoes louder than the lies. He'll never be what he once was. He'll never wear that mask again, not without someone ripping it off in seconds. That was the power we gave each other. And no matter how far he runs, he'll always look over his shoulder, wondering, who did I heard that's finally ready to speak? That question will haunt him. Because now, he is the one living with fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being remembered. Fear of being known, not as the man he pretended to be, but the monster he truly was. And me? I'm no longer haunted by what he did. I've built something real. I mentor survivors. I speak at panels. I lead workshops. I've turned my story into a weapon not of destruction, but awakening. My pain became someone else's survival guide. My scars became a language others could understand. I am not the girl he broke. I'm the woman who rose. The woman who took everything he tried to steal, my voice, my light, my worth, and used it to write his ending. And no, I didn't kill him. But I did something far worse in his eyes. I lived. Louder. Bolder. And I made damn sure he'd never smile again. Because his smile came from control. From knowing he could hurt and walk away untouched. Not anymore. Now, his smile is a ghost. Something he wears in private, but never in peace. And as for me, I smile now. But not the way he did. Mine is real. Because I earned it. From the ashes he left me in. Because I found power in the ruins. Because I walked through the fire. And I didn't just survive. I burned brighter.